Hi, welcome to today's yarn review. In today's episode, I'm going to be reviewing the King Cole Linendale, which I am currently wearing, and I shall be giving you my honest review. So I should be sharing both the good and the bad on how I found this yarn to knit with, how it washed, how it's blocked, how it's wearing, and any other little details that I think might be beneficial for you to know as a knitter or a crocheter before using this yarn. And I shall also be sharing with you details on the pattern that I used to knit this with, in case that's of any interest to you as well. So let's dive into today's yarn review. Okay, so the first thing we should look at is the yarn itself. So this is the King Cole Linendale, and I used this shade here, which is called Mother of Pearl. So it's made up of 57% cotton, 30% viscose and 13% linen. And the Linendale comes in these 50-gram balls, and each ball has 121 meters per ball, and it's a double knit yarn with the recommended needle size of 4 millimeters. And I'll also try and pop in a shade card of the colours that are available in this Linendale, because the colours are beautiful in this range. And the Linendale is around the £3 mark per ball, which I feel is a really reasonable price for 50 grams of a cotton and linen blend. So now let's move on to how I actually found the Linendale to knit with. So the first thing I noticed when I opened up my first ball of Linendale was the texture. And it's not as smooth as I was expecting it to be. It's by no means rough, but it does have a more rustic feel to it than a pure cotton or other pure cottons that I've used in the past. So it's a rougher texture than a pure cotton, which is absolutely fine. It doesn't feel ropey, but it just definitely feels more rustic. And then the second thing I noticed was how the yarn is quite splitty, and that worried me in the beginning as to how this was going to knit up. And a final concern I had before casting this top on was how I was going to find knitting it up. Was it going to hurt my hands? Because in the past, when I've used cottons, I have to admit pure cottons have not been my favourite thing to knit with. I tend to avoid them because I don't always find it the most enjoyable knit. I do find that it can be quite painful on my wrists. So I find that I actually only tend to do maybe 1 or 2 cotton tops per summer, and then I revert back to wool or wool blends, just because I find it easier on my hands. But that's just a personal thing. So those were my 3 main concerns really before starting my project. So now let me share with you my personal experience with using the Linendale to actually knit a garment with. Now, my first concern was splitting. By first impressions, I thought it was going to be a very splitty yarn that I wasn't going to enjoy knitting with. However, it did split, but only a handful of times, which for the size of the garment, I was actually really impressed with. So it didn't disappoint in that way like I thought it was going to. I thought it was going to be really frustrating yarn to knit with, and I thought the splitting was going to spoil the appearance of the top, and I was going to get really frustrated with it and perhaps not even end up finishing the top. But as you can see, I did finish the top and I'm really happy with how it turned out. And I will talk more about the pattern for those that are interested towards the end of the video. But for now, I'll just stick to how I actually found the yarn. So yeah, splitting did happen, but only a handful of times throughout the whole project. So I was actually pleasantly surprised with that. The only other time I had to be mindful of the yarn splitting was if I'd made a mistake and I had to take my work back. Then I had to be careful unpicking the stitches that I didn't split the yarn at that point. So if there was an issue with splitting, I would say it was at that point that I had to be really careful of. But overall, I was really pleasantly surprised with this yarn and that it didn't split as much as I thought it was going to. So let me share with you how I found the texture of the yarn when knitting, because as I said previously, it is a more rustic feeling yarn. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's ropey, but it definitely is rustic. and I really noticed that during the knit. I found it really hard to keep my tension throughout the project, and I did have a few issues with it hurting my wrists, my hands, and I found that it became a lot slower knit for me because I couldn't work on it as long as I would normally knit on a project for. So normally in an evening, if I sit down and watch telly, then I can just knit throughout the programme. But with this top, I found that I had to keep stopping, moving on to a different project and coming back onto this one to give my hands a little bit of a break. So that was a slight downside for me, was that it ended up being quite a slow knit. But with that being said, I was pleased with the stitch definition in this top, and especially after blocking, this top really did bloom. So when I finished the top initially, you could really see that I had struggled a little bit keeping the tension throughout the top, and I was a little bit disappointed with the overall appearance of the top due to the tension issues. However, when I washed and blocked the top, it was a game changer. It bloomed, you couldn't see any tension issues, and now the overall look and feel of the top I really, really like. And to block my hand knits, I never use the washing machine. I always hand wash my items, and to do this, all I do is fill the sink up with some warm water and add a little bit of war wash and just leave it to soak for around 20 minutes or so. Come back, rinse it out gently. Don't handle it too much because you don't want to be pulling the garment out of shape. Give it a rinse through, squeeze the excess water out gently, and then I just simply lay a towel out on the floor, lay my garment out flat, then roll the towel up with the garment inside to squeeze the excess water out. And then to give it a final squeeze, I stand on the towel just to get as much moisture out of the garment as I possibly can. Then I unroll it, and then I get another clean dry towel, lay the garment out completely flat in the shape and size that you want it to dry in, and then just simply leave it somewhere where it's not going to be in the way, and then come back to it 24 hours or so, just check if it's completely dry, and if it is, then I just fold it up and pop it in the drawer ready to wear. I never hang my garments when they're wet because they will just go out of shape. And also when my tops are dry, fully dry, I would never hang this top in my wardrobe. I would always fold it and keep it flat, because cotton, if you haven't knit with it before, has the tendency to grow. So I always just fold any cotton tops up and just keep them flat in the drawer. That is my top tip. So let me now move on to how I feel the Linendale wears. So I have worn this top quite a lot, so I have quite a few things to share about it. The first thing I want to share is how soft the fabric is. After washing and blocking the top feels very different. So when you're knitting the top, you may feel that rusticness that I was talking about and the roughness of the yarn. However, after washing and blocking, this fabric is so soft against my skin that I don't even notice that I'm wearing it. It's that soft. So that was really a nice surprise. And also how cool this top is. The fabric keeps me so cool even on the hottest days. So again, really lovely. Exactly what you want in a summer top. Softness and coolness. Brilliant. Now, I do have one negative about the wearability of this yarn, and that is the stretch. Now, I was hoping that with it being a linen, cotton and viscose blend, this wouldn't happen. This does happen in 100% cotton tops that I've knit, that you do get the stretch, and I was really hoping that the viscose and the linen would counteract the stretch slightly, but unfortunately it doesn't. I do find that by the end of the day, this top has grown. So after washing and blocking the top, it fits me perfectly. But what happens during a day when I'm wearing it, the top grows. So at the beginning of the day, the underarms will be here and it fits perfectly. Then during the day, whether it's my body heat and the weight of the garment, although I have to say the Linendale doesn't feel as weighty as a 100% cotton top does. So I'm not quite sure if it's the weight or just how the fabric reacts when it gets warm, or just a combination of the slight weight and the warmth. I'm not too sure, but what happens is that The fit is perfect. At the beginning of the day, after washing and blocking, it fits me perfectly. By the end of the day, the underarms have stretched and it doesn't fit me quite as well. So I wouldn't be able to wear it again for a second day. Is it a huge problem? No, not for this top, because it's a summer top and I'm wearing it on hot days. So it would generally need a wash anyway. But if you were to knit a jumper in the Linendale, would you want to be washing it every day? Or perhaps it wouldn't be such a problem. Maybe the stretch wouldn't be as noticeable in a jumper. It's probably just because the underarms are more visible on this top that I notice it more perhaps. But that being said, it doesn't stop me from wearing it. I love this top. I have worn it so much. I love the stitch definition of this top. I love the way the yarn pops the cable, and I love the stitch definition of the Linendale. It looks really nice. It looks like a luxurious yarn and it feels like a luxurious yarn, but for a price point of around £3 for 50 grams, I think it's very good value. So would I recommend this yarn? Yes, I would. Would I recommend it if you're brand new to knitting and you've never knit a top before? No. If you have experience in knitting, absolutely. Just be cautious of that splitting when casting on and when taking back. That's the only thing I would say. And also be mindful of the growth in the yarn once it's made. And also just bear in mind that it might be a slightly slower knit, because I personally found I had to rest my hands in between. So this top just took me a little bit longer to knit than it normally would. And overall, I love wearing this top. So now I'm going to move on to the pattern that I use to knit the top. So the top I'm wearing today is the King Cole pattern number 5991, and the Linendale is the recommended yarn for this pattern. And the top is available in various sizes, 32 inches to 50 inches. And I chose to knit the first size, which is the 32. And the great thing about this pattern is that you actually get two patterns for the price of one. So I love this pattern here because of the cable detail, and I love cables. But if you're a beginner and you don't like cables, there is also the option to knit the plain version. So two patterns for the price of one, essentially. So you have a really beginner friendly version, or you have the cable version, which again, to be honest, was a really nice easy knit. Even if you're new to cables, I would say give it a go. I think you'll still be able to manage it. Obviously, if you're an experienced knitter, then it is a really nice knit. So that is the King Cole pattern 5991. So I hope you found today's yarn review helpful and useful. Please do let me know in the comments below if you have used the Linendale and what your thoughts on it are. And also if you plan to use the Linendale and what you plan to make. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel for more yarn reviews and knitting tutorials and knitty chats. And I shall see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.